But my tier one, guys, I got three guys in it. I got Jaden Daniels from LSU. I got KJ Jefferson from Arkansas and Will Rogers from Mississippi State. He'll be in a new offense. So will KJ Jefferson. A lot of questions there. KJ Jefferson going out of the Baylor offense into Dan Enos' offense at Arkansas, and Enos' second run as Arkansas's OC. Will Rogers, Kevin Barbay coming in there. They're going to run the ball a little bit more, not a pure air raid, where Will Rogers has thrown for approximately 35,000 yards in the last two seasons. My tier two is a lot of new faces, guys that we think can be great. I like a lot of upside with all three of these guys. Devin Leary at Kentucky, guy who has had a massive year. He may have had the best year of anybody on this list at NC State a couple of years back before he got injured last year. Joe Milton at Tennessee, a guy I think, unless he falls apart this year, no matter what he does, I think he's going to be a first-round pick. And Connor Wegman, a guy who might be responsible for Texas A&M's rise. And then my tier three guys, Jackson Dart at Ole Miss, Spencer Rattler at South Carolina, Jalen Milroe at Alabama, and Carson Beck at Georgia. We don't know what we're going to get from those guys. And, of course, my tier four guys, not on the board, but Peyton Thorne at Ole Miss. Peyton Thorne at Auburn, Brady Cook at Missouri with a dash of Sam Horn. I will say Brady Cook, he tore his labrum in week 2 last year. He's healthy this year. Maybe that gives him a little upside. We'll see. Kirby Moore calling plays down there at Mizzou. AJ Swan at Vanderbilt, a guy that I think gave you better play than you thought Vanderbilt might get. Took over the job after Mike Wright kind of exploded to start the season last year. But I think there's still a ceiling there. And Graham Mertz at Florida, who Billy Napier is very high on. Finding other people high on him is a little bit of a tougher task. Sam, I will start with you. Who am I most wrong about in my tiers?
You're the funny thing about this list is I actually am not really in large disagreement with it. But what I find interesting is that I think I'm more excited about the tier 2 guys on your list than I am the tier 1 guys. Because to a certain degree, the tier 1 guys, I think, are known commodities. You know, or at least to a certain degree. We saw Jaden Daniels at LSU last year. KJ Jefferson, of course, been really successful at Arkansas, but in a different offense than what he'll be in. You know, Dan Enos is going to bring more of a pro style system there as opposed to what Kendall Briles had. And then Will Rogers, of course, going from the air raid to what Kevin Barbay is going to bring. And we saw they scored a lot of points at App State with him. So I'm intrigued by them, but I'm more excited, I think, about the talent in that tier 2 because, like you mentioned, Devin Leary, I think the ceiling for Devin Leary and combining him with Liam Cohen's return to Kentucky is really intriguing. Joe Milton, the physical talent, super intriguing. Like you watch, I was watching highlights of him last night, and I was just like, my gosh, he jumps off the page in terms of physical talent. And then the guy that I am probably most excited about is Connor Wegman, who's a former 5-star, started the last 3-4 games last year for Texas A&M. And when you watch him in his element, he, to me, looks like a future star. And so I look at all those tier 2 guys as guys who could ascend to tier 1 guys by the season's end if things break right for them. And I just think the talent at that level is what intrigues me the most in this group.
See, I think this is where, Ari and I got into a disagreement on this on our Big Ten ACC Big 12 show, in that I think Ari saw it more as a draft, where I feel like I am with you. I think those tier 2 guys, I'm probably more excited about them than any of the tier 1 guys, except for maybe Jaden Daniels. I think he still has another gear he can get to, another year in the offense. I think he grew up a lot last year and still has a lot of talent around him. Offensive line should be improved. But to me, it feels disrespectful to put guys who haven't really done it. Devin Leary, I think, has done a plenty, but last year was rough and numbers weren't great. And I think he can, with pairing up with Liam Cohen, can do some really, really big things at Kentucky this year. But coming off the year that he had, you compare it to the year of the guys in the tier 1 guys, it feels disrespectful to them to put them on the same plane. Joe Milton, same thing. He's lost a job twice in college football. There's not a lot of guys who have that. We might talk about one later in this podcast that might be in your neck of the woods these days, Sam. But that's a rarity. We haven't seen that a lot. And I think the potential is still there, but the reality is that he did, lose a starting job twice in his college career. And I think he's grown up a lot from that, but you got to do it. And then Connor Wegman, we just haven't seen a ton of. I mean, 2/3 of a season, we saw him make some flashes, but the consistency wasn't necessarily there. Kenny, where am I most wrong in this tier system here?
I can't lie. There's one name in particular that stuck out to me when you first sent the list, and then listening to you just now talk about players who have done it and you need to see more out of them. I feel like Spencer Rattler is too low on this tier list. There was a point a few years ago where he was, the top quarterback, supposedly going to be in the NFL draft after his sophomore year at Oklahoma, and then, obviously Caleb Williams kind of ascended and he went to South Carolina, and it was an up and down year in 2022. But I felt like at the end of the year, he really caught stride going, starting from that Tennessee game, which was a huge offensive explosion. The last 3 games that he played, no, they didn't win the bowl game, but I felt like the wheels really started to turn for him in terms of just confidence playing under Shane Beamer. And, this is another quarterback. I know he wasn't in, the tier where you mentioned guys moving into a new offense, but he has a new offensive coordinator as well. Just listening to him talk about the things that they're going to do differently on offense and just kind of his excitement and being there for a second year at South Carolina, I really feel like Spencer Rattler is in a position to remind people of who he was in 2020, where he kind of had a meteoric rise. So I don't know if I would go as far as to say he's a tier 1 guy, but I feel like he should be comfortably in tier 2.
Maybe, but I'll counter you with this. Last year, before you got to the month of November, Spencer Rattler had 5 touchdown passes, and he had, let me count, 6, 7, 8, 9 interceptions. That's a problem. I think his career trajectory has been very odd. One of the weirdest trajectories that we've seen in college football, because I think he might have a great year here. I think the question is, is the consistency there? Can you be that guy and be that guy every single week? A couple games, two games under 60% completion percentage, 1 under 50. That's a problem. And so, ultimately, I think the way he closed the season, if he can be that guy every week, Spencer Rattler might be in the Heisman conversation, quite frankly. What he did to Tennessee, I mean, listen, you can rip on Tennessee's defense all you want, but go watch the Kentucky game. Like, this is not a hapless defense. I mean, he tore them up. And then going and beating Clemson and playing as well as he did in that game. Rattler is fascinating, but I think for me, when you see guys who have embodied 2 poles, I kind of tend toward, I would like this ugly pole to not exist. And if you've shown me that ugly pole exists, I got some doubts about you. So I think Spencer Rattler is best. I agree with you. Spencer Rattler is best as a tier 1 guy, but Spencer Rattler is worst. He's down there in the tier 4. And if you've shown me that you could be a tier 4 guy for 2/3 of a season, I tend to believe you more than 2 great games. So Spencer Rattler is fascinating. I think we've seen him look like a lot of different people throughout his career. I think those last couple games before he lost his job at Oklahoma, those kind of stick in my mind too. So I think I had so much built up scar tissue with waiting for Spencer Rattler to be great that when he finally popped and was great in those last 2 games, that I'm kind of raising my eyebrows, and it didn't make me forget about everything else. Sam, when you look at the tier 4 guys in this group, who's got the biggest upside between Peyton Thorne at Auburn, Brady Cook at Mizzou, AJ Swan at Vanderbilt, and Graham Mertz at Florida? Are you sipping any of the Gatorade down there?
Probably. I mean, just based on experience, I think Graham Mertz, you feel like, could make the biggest jump in this group, just based on all his starting experience at Wisconsin. And I know the play and the statistics haven't been, what you would like, but you would think that Billy Napier and his history could make this a really good marriage between those two. And then I'll look at Peyton Thorne, and Hugh Freeze has a really great track record of putting together really good offensive football teams and getting some quarterbacks on track. So those are the 2 that I look at with the higher ceilings. I do like AJ Swan. You talked about Vanderbilt and getting some better quarterback play. He's got some juice to him. I kind of like KJ a little bit, but of those of those guys on the list, I think Mertz and Thorne are probably the ones that have the highest potential to move up this list.
So let's have the conversation, Kenny. I think when you look at Milroe, he has such a small sample size. I was at the Arkansas game last year. I saw him rescue them when they were in a lot of trouble. And then you have the A&M game where you needed your defense to make a stop there to save you from losing on the road to a team that ultimately, didn't go to a bowl game. What is his ceiling this year, Kenny? And is there a chance that we're hating on him and he's a tier 1 guy in hiding?
Yeah, I think that potential is definitely there. When you look at him from just a physical playmaking standpoint, I mean, he's electric, and you saw that in the Arkansas game. And I know there were turnovers in the Texas A&M game, but the way that he was able to create plays with his legs and just create mismatches with the defense is notable. And I think his ceiling is, probably, I would say probably tier 2, maybe fringe level, tier 1. It really depends on how much he's progressed from not only a passing standpoint, which, people highlight a lot when they say, okay, can Milroe throw the ball? Can he make those throws downfield? Also just decision making, not going for the deep shot every time, sometimes checking it down, or if he decides that he's going to run, making sure that he has 2 hands on the ball. There was one fumble, especially in that Texas A&M game, where he was trying to escape the pocket, had 1 hand on the ball. He was a little careless with it. Just having 2 hands, a simple adjustment as that, I think will go a long way in terms of his development. But I'm pretty optimistic on Milroe. And one thing I'll say about what happened last year to what is supposedly going to happen this year, I expect him to get that first start against Middle Tennessee. Is last year he was kind of thrusted into a situation where Bama's offense was completely Bryce Young reliant, and a lot of it was hero ball. And he goes into a situation with Arkansas where he's kind of coming in cold and just making plays on the fly. In that Texas A&M game, there were looks that were advantageous to his play style, but there really wasn't a lot of time to fit an offensive game plan around his strengths. Now you bring in Tommy Rees, who has an affinity for RPOs and zone reads, and he's somebody who's going to build the offense within Bama's foundation around what they do well, which is going to be running the ball. So putting him in an offense where he can kind of tailor a lot of it to his strengths, where they're going to run the ball. I think they're going to use tight ends a lot more than they have in years past, and they have some guys on that roster that I know they're excited about to potentially put into some 2 tight end sets. And I think the biggest thing with Milroe is he's going to need a receiver in that room to step up and kind of be the guy, which is as much as Bama's DNA as running the ball and playing good defense is always having kind of a dominant one receiver, which they didn't have last year. So they can get somebody to pop in that receiver room and then they can run the ball in an offense that I think is going to be a lot more tailored to Milroe's strengths. If he can reach that above average passing category and do so consistently, then I think that he's going to be potentially one of the breakout stars in the league this year.
Sam, I've got a semi hot take. I'd like to get your thoughts on. I kind of believe that no matter what he does this year, we're not going to have any idea how good Carson Beck is unless we see him be like making some unbelievable throws, which I'm not sure he has to do. I think if you put Brady Cook in his situation, if you put Jackson Dart in his situation, AJ Swan in his situation is a good, interesting question. If you flip those guys, I think they'd have similar expectations. You have him walking into a situation here where, most importantly, I think their offensive line is going to be elite this year. But you have Ra Thomas, you have Dom Lovett, you have, probably the best player in the SEC, maybe one of the best players in college, not maybe one of the best players in college football, in Brock Bowers to throw to. I think they'll have a pretty good running game. I think they'll be solid again. Maybe they don't live off of that, but good enough to keep them balanced. So he's walking into this ideal situation where you have a ton of targets. You have a new offensive coordinator, but you have so much help around you that it's hard to even know how good you are. I mean, you look at Stetson Bennett. He's got a national championship game charging in on his second, and people are still like, I don't know. Can this guy play? Like, I think people really underrated what Stetson brought to the table, especially with his legs. But with Carson, I think it's going to be, twofold. I think he's a guy that is going to, face a lot of doubt. And even if he has a great game, You're going to see people sort of roll their eyes because there's so much around him. What do you make of the Carson Beck situation, Sam? And am I correct in my take that unless he's making unbelievable throws every other game, every other possession, that people are going to kind of whatever he does?
I mean, heavy lies the crown, right? This is a program that's won 2 in a row, and the standard is going to be high. I almost compare it in a way to Alabama before the offense changed. You remember when Lane Kiffin came in and the offense changed, but before that, it was a team built on great defense, running the football, and a quarterback, not to use this pejoratively, but managing the game. And I think with Mike Bobo being back there, they're going to try to put him in situations where he's going to be able to manage the game well, and he's not going to put him in compromising situations. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great approach. When you have as much talent as Georgia does, that's totally fine. You don't have to go out there and have your quarterback win the game for you and carry the team for you. This is not the situation Georgia's in. They have the luxury of all those guys around him and a great defense and the schedule that seems pretty forgiving this year, that he does not have to go out and be a world beater. That said, it doesn't mean that he's not a good quarterback. It's just a matter of what is he going to be allowed to do within the constraints of their offense? What are they asking him to do? And so to that point, I do agree, that it's going to be a little bit of challenge to get a sense for what his true ceiling is. But I still think at the end of the year, we're going to probably be looking back and saying that he had a pretty good season.
But I don't know that you could still win like that in the SEC, especially how much it's changed. Kenny, I think you're on board with, like, I think you foresee what I think a lot of people do, in that Alabama is going to be a little bit more like that, their old Alabama teams. I am skeptical that you can win the SEC doing that. I think Georgia can, in part because they will have that vertical ability, and they have the skill position talent and the offensive line talent, and most importantly, I think the schedule. They're not going to have to run into a lot of big situations. But with Alabama, I'm skeptical that you can still be an elite team doing that, and certainly that you can win a national championship doing that. Kenny, where do you stand on this and the SEC's evolution? And if having a game manager at quarterback, can you still get to December and hold up an SEC title trophy?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that conversation, I think at the end of the day, you are still going to need your quarterback to make, a few special plays in a big game to kind of get you over that hump. I do think, though, that when you talk about this kind of complementary style of football, I still think that can win in college football. I think, again, Georgia was a great example of that last year. And Stetson Bennett did make some pretty great plays with his legs, and he was dynamic in a few games. But I never really got the sense that Georgia was a quarterback reliant team. It just kind of felt like, some of all parts, everybody kind of chipped in. I think having, elite playmakers like the Brock Bowers and the Darnell Washingtons and Lad McConkey, that helps. Having a great defense helps as well. But I think, executing it and having, good play on all three phases with a quarterback that may not be a Caleb Williams can win. And I think especially this year in college football, specifically when you kind of look around the landscape, really outside of Michigan, a lot of the teams that we're talking about, seriously contending for a championship all have a question at quarterback in some way or another, whether it's Georgia, Bama, Ohio State breaking into quarterbacks. You said Jaden Daniels has another gear to reach at LSU. Is he going to revert to early 2022 Jaden Daniels, or is he going to look like the Jaden Daniels of late in the year? USC with their defense, question marks there as well. Florida State with Jordan Travis, is he going to take that next step? So I think this year you can have kind of a team, if you have great other parts and quote unquote subpar quarterback play who can make those dynamic plays when you need them. I still think that can win. And going back to the Alabama conversation, that's why I favor Jalen Milroe over the pack right now, is because he just has that game breaking X factor type of element to his game. So it depends on a lot. I know Alabama specifically, communication on the defense, they gave up a lot of big plays last year. Penalty really, really hurt that team, especially against Tennessee and LSU. So they're going to need that elevated play to kind of prop him up. I think Georgia is in a better position to do that, because we've seen that style win the last 2 years of, an elite roster kind of elevating a quarterback. So, quarterback's going to have to make plays, but I think, in this case, we're talking about Georgia and Alabama. They're going to need, the other position groups to really prop up their quarterback and hold up their end of the deal as well.
All I'm hearing is Kenny hating on Stetson Bennett again out here in Athens, Tennessee. Kenny, don't say that too loud. Don't say that too loud. Well, Kenny,
4,000-yard passer, Stetson Bennett.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
That's
I am not taking anything away from Stetson. And he, I'm thinking of a lot of plays that he made last year, like that 80-yard run against Auburn was crazy, and he did take Georgia on that drive against Ohio State, but Georgia had a lot of playmakers on offense, and there was a lot of getting the ball to A.D. Mitchell and Brock and those guys in space, Kenny McIntosh, letting them make plays, and the defense held up their end of the deal as well. So it wasn't like a Bryce Young situation where I felt like Alabama's game plan was, here, Bryce Young, just take us there offensively and have Will Anderson kind of, hopefully, break a game open on defense. So I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm coming from Iowa and I'm just like scarred and conditioned to believe that complimentary football is the way to go. But I don't know. I just feel like this year, specifically in 2023, if you have a roster and competent quarterback play, that can get it done.